Elias Carter's boots hit the cold, unforgiving ground of Veralis 9, and the shuttle that had dumped him here was already vanishing into the dark sky. The Dominion soldiers hadn't even spared him a final glance. To them, he was already dead. He exhaled, watching his breath swirl in the frigid air, then turned his gaze to the nightmare of a world around him. The sky was a swirling mix of green and black, with two pale moons casting an eerie glow over jagged mountains and a dense, twisted jungle that pulsed with alien life. The Dominion had sent him here to die, and if the stories were true, he wouldn't last a single night. The air was thick with an unnatural scent, metallic and damp, like rusting iron mixed with rotting flesh. Every shadow moved, every whisper of wind felt like a warning. The trees were nothing like the ones on Earth. They were tall, spindly things with pulsating veins of blue light running through their bark, like they were alive in ways beyond just growing. Strange insects the size of his fist clung to the branches, their multiple eyes glistening hungrily in the moonlight. Elias knew that if he was going to survive, he had to move. Standing still meant becoming prey. His hands clenched into fists as he trudged forward, pushing through the dense undergrowth. The Dominion had stripped him of weapons, armor, and supplies, but they had underestimated him. He was a soldier, a survivor, and most importantly, he was human. Earth had been a graveyard of wars, disasters, and endless struggles long before humanity had reached the stars. If there was one thing humans knew better than any species in the galaxy, it was how to adapt. A distant growl echoed through the jungle, deep and guttural, shaking the very ground beneath him. Elias froze. He knew that sound. The HFY, the apex predator of Veralis 9, a creature so dangerous that even the Dominion avoided direct confrontation with it. The beasts were said to be massive, nearly indestructible, with razor-edged limbs and eyes that glowed like molten gold in the dark. No one had ever seen one up close and lived to tell the tale. Elias could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching him, waiting, calculating. He moved quickly, weaving between the trees, every step careful and precise. The Dominion had thrown him onto this planet, expecting him to panic, to make mistakes, to run blindly into the jaws of death. But he wouldn't give them that satisfaction. He studied his surroundings, memorizing the landscape, marking possible hiding spots, and making mental notes of anything that could be useful. The trees' glowing veins suggested an energy source, maybe heat, maybe something else. The insects, despite their grotesque appearance, seemed skittish, meaning something far worse was lurking nearby. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. It was impossible to tell time in this never-ending twilight. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and exhaustion dragged at his limbs, but stopping was not an option. He found a small rock formation and pressed himself against it, scanning the jungle for movement. That was when he saw it. A shadow moved between the trees, massive and deliberate. It was there, then gone, then there again. The HFY. Elias's breath caught in his throat as he got his first real look at the thing. It was huge, easily 3 times his height, its body covered in overlapping plates of dark, chitinous armor. Its elongated head bore jagged spikes, and its limbs ended in claws sharp enough to carve through steel. Its golden eyes flickered in the dark, locking onto him with an intelligence that sent a shiver down his spine. This was no mindless beast. It was a hunter. Elias remained perfectly still, knowing that even the smallest movement could trigger an attack. The HFY tilted its head, as if studying him, assessing him. It took a slow step forward, the ground trembling beneath its weight. His heart pounded, but his mind stayed sharp. Running would be suicide. Fighting was impossible. But there was one thing left understanding. Most species that the Dominion ruled had looked at humanity with either pity or disdain. They called humans weak, fragile, emotional. But what they never understood was that humans were something else entirely adaptive. They had not survived Earth's countless wars, famines, and disasters by being the strongest. They had survived by learning, by observing, by becoming something greater than what they were yesterday. Elias didn't move, didn't reach for a weapon he didn't have. He met the beast's glowing gaze, forcing himself to remain calm. He had faced death before, on the battlefields of distant planets, against enemies that saw him as nothing more than another target. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was something older, more primal, a test. The Exirac let out a low, rumbling sound, somewhere between a growl and a purr. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished back into the shadows. Elias exhaled slowly, feeling a cold sweat on his skin. The message was clear. He had been judged, but not yet claimed. For now, he had been spared. But for how long? With renewed determination, Elias pressed forward. If the Dominion thought they had sent him here to die, they were wrong. He wasn't just going to survive Viralis 9. He was going to conquer it. The jungle of Viralis 9 was alive with movement, but Elias Carter had learned how to listen beyond the noise. Every rustling leaf, every distant growl, every unnatural silence meant something. This planet wanted him dead, but he wasn't going to make it easy. Days had passed since he was abandoned here, and his body was battered, his muscles aching from exhaustion, but his mind was sharper than ever. Hunger gnawed at him like a parasite, and thirst burned his throat, but he had pushed past those weaknesses. Survival wasn't just about endurance, it was about learning, adapting, and becoming something more than prey. The Dominion had sent him here expecting him to run in fear, but he had no intention of running. He was here to hunt. Elias crouched behind a twisted rock formation, his eyes fixed on the dense jungle ahead. He had spent the past nights tracking the Exirac, the apex predator of this world, the beast that had stalked him through the darkness. It had tested him, watching, waiting, but not striking. At first, he thought it was toying with him, but now he understood this was a game of dominance. The Exirac was not just a mindless killer. It was intelligent. It was a ruler of this land, and Elias was an intruder. He knew he had two choices: remain prey or prove himself worthy. There was no in-between. His fingers tightened around the crude spear he had fashioned from a jagged piece of bone and a sharpened rock. It was primitive, barely enough to pierce the thick hide of the monsters that roamed this world, but it was something. A tool. A weapon. A start. He had watched the smaller creatures, seen how they moved, how they evaded predators, how they survived in a place where death lurked behind every shadow. He mimicked their techniques, blending into the terrain, moving without a sound, reading the land as if it were a battlefield. The Exirac's trail was fresh. Broken branches, deep claw marks in the soil, the lingering scent of something cold and metallic. It was near. Elias inhaled slowly, controlling his breathing. Fear was useless now. If he was afraid, he was already dead. He stepped forward, every movement calculated, his eyes scanning for the faintest hint of golden light in the darkness. Then he saw it a glimmer between the trees, low to the ground, unmoving. The Exirac was watching him. Waiting, Elias didn't hesitate. He advanced slowly, his heartbeat steady, his grip firm on his weapon. He knew what the beast was expecting. It thought he would flee, like every other creature that had stood before it. But instead of running, he did something else. He challenged it. He planted his feet, raised his spear, and let out a deep, guttural sound, not quite a growl, not quite a roar, but something raw and primal. The Exirac's glowing eyes narrowed. The air between them crackled with tension. This was the moment. The test. The beast moved. Not in a frenzied attack, but with slow, deliberate steps. It emerged from the shadows, its massive form towering over him. Its claws sank into the ground with every step, but it did not lunge. Instead, it circled him, studying, measuring. Elias remained still, muscles coiled, ready. He did not break eye contact. He knew that in the wild, to look away was to submit. And he would not submit. The Exirac stopped, nostrils flaring, then let out a low, rumbling growl. It was a warning, a challenge in return. Elias tightened his grip on his spear, his body tense, his instincts screaming. Then, in a blur of motion, the beast attacked. Elias barely had time to move before the Exirac's claws slashed through the space where he had stood moments ago. He dove to the side, rolling onto his feet, spear raised. The beast turned sharply, faster than something its size should be able to move. It lunged again, and Elias reacted. He sidestepped at the last moment, slamming the shaft of his spear against the creature's exposed leg. The impact did nothing to harm it, but it made the Xerac hesitate, if only for a second. Place he had prepared. The Xerac roared, muscles rippling as it gave chase, crashing through the jungle like a storm. Elias ran, weaving through the terrain, dodging its strikes, heart pounding as he neared his destination. Then, as the beast lunged once more, he made his move. He jumped. The Xerac's momentum carried it forward straight into the pit Elias had carved into the earth. It was deep, lined with sharpened spikes, and just wide enough to trap something as massive as the beast. The creature let out a snarl of fury as it tumbled down, its claws scraping against the walls, struggling to find footing. It wasn't enough to kill it, not yet, but it was enough to stop it. Elias stood at the edge, breathing heavily, staring down at the predator that had hunted him for days. The beast's golden eyes burned with rage. But there was something else in them now. Something new. Recognition. He had not run. He had not fallen. He had not died. And now, for the first time, the Xerac knew it. He wasn't just another weak creature waiting to be devoured. He was something else, and for the first time, the beast hesitated. Elias took a step closer, gripping the vines he had prepared, lowering them slowly into the pit. The Xerac growled but did not attack. It watched him, waited, and then, after a long moment, it moved. Not to kill, but to climb. The hunt was over. The real test had just begun. Elias Carter stood at the edge of the pit, gripping the vine with steady hands as the Xerac pulled itself up, claws scraping against the rock. The beast's molten gold eyes locked onto him, unreadable yet filled with something new curiosity. It had every reason to rip him apart, to crush him for daring to challenge it, but it didn't. Not yet. This was something neither of them had ever experienced before. Elias had spent his life fighting against impossible odds, against enemies who saw humanity as nothing more than an inconvenience, but never before had he stared down a creature so powerful, so primal, and felt something other than fear. This was not just a predator. It was something more. And now, it was watching him, waiting for his next move. The jungle around them was silent, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. The Xerac slowly climbed out of the pit, its massive form moving with a grace that should have been impossible for something so large. Its armor-like hide gleamed under the eerie glow of Viralis 9's twin moons, its every muscle tense, prepared to strike if necessary. Elias knew that one wrong move would mean death. He had survived the hunt, but now came the harder part, earning the beast's trust. He didn't lower his spear. He didn't step back. He stood his ground. The Xerac let out a low, rumbling growl, not a threat, but a warning. Elias understood. It was testing him, seeing if he would run like every other creature on this planet. He didn't. Instead, he did something unexpected. He lowered his weapon. He could feel the weight of the beast's gaze, the tension in the air thick enough to cut. His heartbeat slowed, controlled, steady. Every instinct screamed at him to be ready for an attack, but he ignored it. The Xerac was not just a mindless killer. It was intelligent. It had observed him, just as he had observed it. And now, for the first time, it was faced with something it had never encountered before: a human who refused to act like prey. The creature tilted its head slightly, its sharp, curved horns catching the moonlight. It sniffed the air, muscles shifting beneath its thick hide as it took a step closer. Elias tensed, but didn't move. The Xerac was testing him, inching forward, closing the distance, watching for any sign of weakness. Then, in a sudden burst of movement, it lunged, not in an attack, but in challenge. Elias barely had time to react before the beast's massive form crashed against him, knocking him to the ground. The air was forced from his lungs as he hit the dirt, his arms pinned beneath the sheer weight of the creature's limb. The Xerac loomed over him, its fanged maw just inches from his face, breath hot and heavy against his skin. This was it. The final test. If he struggled, if he panicked, he was dead. But if he proved himself, he might just survive. He met the Xerac's gaze, refusing to break eye contact. Slowly, deliberately, he forced his breathing to steady, his muscles to relax. This was a standoff, a silent battle of wills. The beast let out another growl, deep and reverberating, as if daring him to resist. Elias didn't. He didn't fight. He didn't beg. He simply waited. The seconds stretched, feeling like an eternity, until finally the Xerac released its grip and took a step back. Elias exhaled, sitting up cautiously. The beast was still watching him, its massive form tense, but there was something different in its stance now: acceptance. He had passed its test. It didn't see him as an enemy, nor as prey. He was something else. Something worthy. A flicker of understanding passed between them. The Xerac tilted its head slightly, and for the first time, it did not bare its fangs. It did not growl. It simply stood there, waiting. Elias slowly rose to his feet, his muscles aching, his body exhausted, but his mind sharper than ever. He had done what no one else had. He had tamed the untamable. The jungle around them seemed different now, less hostile, less suffocating. The planet had not changed, but Elias had. He was no longer just a survivor clawing his way through the darkness. He was something more. The Xerac, the very creature that had once stalked him, now walked beside him. Not as a master and beast, not as predator and prey, but as two forces that had found common ground. As the night stretched on, Elias felt something stirred deep within him, a certainty that this was only the beginning. The Dominion had sent him here to die, but they had made a mistake. They had underestimated him. He was coming back. And this time, he wasn't coming alone. The hunt was over. The real war was about to begin. The massive warship Dominion Wrath hovered over the barren wastelands of Veralis 9, its metal hull gleaming under the pale light of the twin moons. Inside, the officers stood in silent amusement as they watched the planet's surface through the observation deck. Elias Carter had been sent here to die, abandoned with nothing but the clothes on his back. That was the fate of those who defied the Dominion exile to a world where survival was impossible. No human had ever returned. No one had ever survived. The officers had long stopped thinking about him. To them, he was already dead. But then, the alarms blared. A security officer's voice cracked through the ship's intercom, panic-laced in every word. Unidentified lifeform detected at the landing perimeter. Scanners confirm human presence. The silence in the command center was absolute. It was impossible. No human could have lasted more than a few days on that forsaken planet, let alone return. The officers rushed to the monitors, disbelief and confusion spreading like wildfire. The external cameras flickered to life, and there, standing at the edge of the Dominion's landing zone, was a man dirty, scarred, and unbroken. Elias Carter had returned. But he was not alone. The air around him shimmered with the heat of Veralis 9's harsh environment, but that was not what sent fear crawling through the officer's veins. It was the creature that stood beside him. The Xerac, a towering beast of muscle and armor, its golden eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. It let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that sent shivers through even the most hardened warriors. The creature did not move like a mindless beast. It stood beside Elias, silent, waiting. The officers stared in shock. The Xerac were apex predators, untamable, unstoppable killing machines. No one had ever controlled one, let alone tamed it. Yet, here was a man who had not only survived, but had returned with the deadliest creature of Veralis 9 at his side as an ally. The comms exploded with frantic voices, orders being shouted as security teams scrambled to the landing zone. Weapons were primed, soldiers positioned themselves in defensive formations, their rifles aimed at the man and the beast. But Elias did not stop. He walked forward, calm, steady, as if he had never left. The Xerac followed. A voice boomed through the speakers. "Stand down. You are trespassing on Dominion property. Identify yourself or be terminated." Elias only smiled, the fire in his eyes burning brighter than the Dominion officers had ever seen before. "You know who I am," he said, his voice carrying through the open space. "You left me here to die." He took another step, unbothered by the rifles aimed at him. "And yet, here I am." The soldiers hesitated. The Ixirac growled, taking a step forward, and panic rippled through the ranks. The officers had been prepared to deal with an exile, not a man who had returned from the impossible, wielding a monster as his weapon. Elias stopped just a few feet away, standing tall, his gaze unwavering. He had been discarded, treated like nothing. But now, the Dominion officers saw the truth. They had made a mistake. They had sent a man to die, and instead, they had created something else. Something stronger. Something dangerous. A legend. The air was thick with tension. One wrong move, and blood would be spilled. Elias could see the fear in their eyes, the uncertainty. They had sent him here to be erased from history, but instead he had become something that could never be forgotten. And now, he was here for one reason: to take everything back. The Ixirac let out a final, earth-shaking roar, and for the first time in Dominion history, the soldiers hesitated. The void of space trembled as the Dreadnought-class warship, Revenant, tore through the darkness, its hull reflecting the cold light of distant stars. It was not alone. A fleet of human warships followed, their engines burning with the fury of a species that had been pushed too far for too long. The Dominion had ruled over them, crushed them, exiled them, but now humanity had returned, and this time they were not here to beg. They were here to make the galaxy remember their name. Elias Carter stood on the bridge of the Revenant, his gaze locked on the massive Dominion fleet ahead. It was an armada, a force that had once seemed invincible. But that illusion had shattered the moment humanity had learned the truth. They were never weak. They were never inferior. They had only been waiting. The Dominion had taken everything from them, but in doing so, they had forged something far more dangerous, a united humanity, one that no longer feared war. Elias clenched his fists as the red glow of battle alarms bathed the command center in a violent hue. The time had come. "Commander, the Dominion fleet is locking weapons." An officer reported, tension in his voice. Elias smirked. "Let them." The Dominion had always believed in their superiority, their untouchable power. For centuries, they had dictated the fate of lesser species, believing humanity to be nothing more than a nuisance. But that arrogance had blinded them to the one thing humans did best: adapt, survive, overcome. They had been beaten, exiled, hunted like animals, but they had never been broken. Every loss had only sharpened their resolve, every defeat had only strengthened their will. And now, as the Dominion fleet prepared to crush them once again, they had no idea what was about to be unleashed. The Revenant's weapons came to life, energy surging through its massive cannons. The rest of the fleet followed, their targeting systems locking onto the enemy ships. The Dominion had the numbers, the technology, but humanity had something far more powerful. They had a reason to fight. "Fire," Elias ordered. Space itself ignited as the first volley of human weapons tore through the void. Explosions bloomed across the Dominion fleet as their shields flickered under the unexpected precision of the human attack. They had underestimated them. Again. But humanity had learned from every battle, every war. They moved faster, hit harder. Where once they'd been scattered, divided, they now fought as one force, one purpose. The enemy flagship turned, its massive cannons preparing to fire. Elias watched as the energy built within its core, a blast powerful enough to cripple half their fleet. But before it could fire, a shadow moved through the chaos, a monstrous shape weaving through the battlefield with unnatural speed. The Ixirac. Elias had not come alone. The very beasts that had once ruled Veralis 9 had been tamed, turned into humanity's deadliest weapon. Their armored bodies withstood Dominion fire. Their claws tore through metal like paper. They leaped from warship to warship, crushing defenses, spreading terror through the enemy ranks. The Dominion had always seen themselves as the apex predators of the galaxy. Tonight, they learned the truth. They were the prey, Elias watched as the Xerac crashed into the Dominion flagship, its golden eyes burning with primal fury. The beast roared, a sound that echoed through the void, a declaration of war that sent shivers through even the most battle-hardened Dominion soldiers. The ship buckled under the assault, its weapons silenced as its crew panicked. "Push forward," Elias commanded. "No mercy." The human fleet surged ahead, weaving through the chaos, their weapons finding every weakness in the Dominion's defenses. The once mighty armada was crumbling. Their empire, their illusion of power, was breaking apart with every explosion, every lost ship. For too long, humanity had suffered. For too long, they had endured. But now they struck back. And they would not stop until the Dominion was nothing.